All right, so a couple days ago was the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and about a month before this anniversary, a lot of the family members of victims of 9/11 who have been trying to sue the Saudi Arabian government for years now basically told Joe Biden, if you are not going to release a lot of these secretive documents that the Trump administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration have been keeping from us in terms of relations to Saudi Arabia and their involvement in 9/11, then Joe Biden, you can basically fuck off and don't come to this memorial service. So this is what happened about a month ago. The families from these victims basically told Joe Biden, fuck off. If you don't want to release these documents, then don't come to the 20th anniversary memorial service. And so Joe Biden basically cracked and he said, okay, I will release some of these documents. And we have now begun this process of looking into some of these documents that have been released. And there are some pretty damning ones already. So the FBI released his first declassified 9/11 document following Biden's executive order. So here are some of the details from Kenny Stansel of Common Dreams. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation on Saturday night released a previously withheld document related to its probe of the September 11, 2001 attacks and allegations of Saudi government support for plane hijackers. So the 16-page document, which was written in 2016 and remains heavily redacted, is the first of several classified reports expected to be published in the coming months following an executive order issued last week by U.S. President Joe Biden. So again, this is just the first report. So this is not the entire picture. These are not all of the documents. These are just the first set of ones that we are going to be continuing to see over the coming weeks. So I'll continue to make videos about them as we get more of them. But we know from these documents, so quote, it details multiple connections and witness testimony that prompted FBI suspicion of a guy named Omar al-Boyami, who was purportedly a Saudi student in Los Angeles, but whom the FBI suspected to be a Saudi intelligence agent. And CNN noted that the FBI document describes him as deeply involved in providing travel assistance, lodging, and financing to help the two hijackers. So we have a Saudi Arabian intelligence officer or suspected intelligence officer that basically intercepted and helped two of the hijackers during 9/11 in the year previous to 9/11, was basically helping them with planning and assistance and lodging and financing and travel, as they just said right there, helping with a lot of the logistics on the ground. Now again, this isn't like the highest levels of the Saudi Arabian government. It's not necessarily like the king of Saudi Arabia, but it is a potential intelligence officer. So it is the Saudi government in some form, one or another, being involved at some level. And so they continue saying, in addition, NPR noted that while the 9/11 Commission report released in 2004 was largely unable to tie the Saudi men to the hijackers, the FBI document describes multiple connections and phone calls. And according to the news outlet, years ago, the commission wrote that when it came to Saudi diplomat Fahad al-Thumanari, we have not found evidence that he provided assistance to the two hijackers, and a decade later, it appears FBI agents came to a different conclusion. The report says that he tasked an associate to help the hijackers when they arrived in Los Angeles and told the associate the hijackers were two very significant people more than a year before the attacks. And although the FBI document, quote, outlined contacts between the hijackers and Saudi associates, it supplied, quote, no evidence that the government in Riyadh was complicit in the attacks, according to Reuters. Now, let's get to some more of the specifics here. So as Reuters also reported, 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. A U.S. government commission found no evidence that Saudi Arabia directly funded al-Qaeda, the group given safe haven by the Taliban in Afghanistan at the time. It left open whether individual Saudi officials might have. And the families of roughly 2,500 of those killed and the 20,000 people who suffered injuries, businesses, and various insurers have sued the Saudi Arabian government, seeking billions of dollars in response to the injuries suffered during 9/11. So according to NPR, while the report does not draw any direct links between the hijackers and the Saudi Arabian government as a whole, Jim Kreindler, who represents many of the families suing Saudi Arabia, said the report does validate the arguments that they have made in the case. And this document, together with public evidence gathered to date, provides a blueprint for how al-Qaeda operated inside the U.S. with the active, knowing support of the Saudi government. And in response to a public disclosure of the FBI document, the 9/11 Families United said in a statement that, quote, this report and other evidence confirms that it was a group of Saudi government officials affiliated with the kingdom's Ministry of Islamic Affairs, the cradle of Wahhabi extremism within the Saudi government, who came immediately to their aid as they commenced their terrorist preparations. And even with the unfortunate number of redactions, the report contains a host of bombshell new revelations implicating numerous Saudi government officials in a coordinated effort to mobilize an essential support network for the first arriving 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al Midhar. The organization continued. The range of contacts at critical moments among these Saudi government officials, Al-Qaeda, and the hijackers is stunning. So again, that's according to the people who are representing 9/11 families that are trying to sue the Saudi Arabian government. So take that into consideration with the statements that they're giving. Obviously, they're going to have some sort of a slant and be trying to interpret these documents in a certain way. But honestly, I mean, reading into the documents themselves. So you have basically what is suspected to be a Saudi intelligence official, right? This equivalent of a CIA agent, right? For the Saudi Arabian government, who's based in Los Angeles. He's supposedly a grad student, even though he's not going to school at all, and he's receiving funding from God knows where. And this guy is basically receiving and helping with travel and other logistical operations for 2 of the hijackers that were then involved in 9/11. So the question of whether or not Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11 is more of a question of what degree were they involved and how high does this involvement actually go in terms of the levels of this Saudi Arabian government, and not one of whether or not they were involved at any level. It's pretty clear, at least from this evidence and other evidence, that Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabian officials at some level were involved in the planning and the execution and the logistical support for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So it's really just more of a question of how much were they involved and who specifically was involved in this, more than it's a question of whether or not they were actually involved in it at all. So we basically have some pretty bombshell reports that are being dropped here, and it seems like we're going to be continuing to see more and more of these roll out. But honestly, this is just a reminder of really the bigger questions surrounding 9/11 and the subsequent policies and foreign policy decisions that were made in the aftermath of it, okay? Again, like they said in that, 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was Saudi Arabian, okay? They say, you know, he was based and given safe harbor by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Well, even then, okay, we used 9/11. George W. Bush used 9/11 to invade Afghanistan, to invade Iraq. So the supposed goal initially of invading Afghanistan was, well, we have to suppress Al-Qaeda, we have to go after Osama bin Laden and get the people who basically attacked us. And a lot of people got on board with this idea, right? Because it seems pretty reasonable at surface value, right? We're going to go after Osama bin Laden, we're going to get him. Well, guess what? Within the first about 6 months to a year of that military operation, basically all of Al-Qaeda had been suppressed to a large extent in Afghanistan. Basically all of the top level officials, including Osama bin Laden himself within Al-Qaeda, had already fled Afghanistan. And in fact, when we ended up killing Osama bin Laden, he wasn't in Afghanistan, he was in Pakistan in a compound all the way over there. So it wasn't even as if we started this 20-year operation and then after 20 years we finally found Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. That's not at all what happened. This was basically used as a justification to launch a 20-year handout to the military-industrial complex and a nation-building project that clearly failed as it fell apart in the Afghan government, fell apart within a couple of weeks after us leaving. So it was a completely failed 20-year nation-building project that was launched on the idea that we go and get the people who attacked us on 9/11, which the Afghanistan war was then used as a justification for the Iraq war, which Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. So it's like the degree to which Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11 is a good question, because this is one of our continued top allies, right? One of our top allies who commits widespread human rights abuses across the planet all the time. One of the biggest exporters of terrorism across the Middle East is Saudi Arabia. This is one of our closest allies. Saudi Arabia, again, continuing the blockade and the assault on people in Yemen, which is causing the worst humanitarian crisis in the entire world right now. So this is who we are allied with. This is who we work with in the region. So yeah, of course we should be getting answers in terms of how they were involved in the planning of 9/11, the execution, the logistical support for 9/11. But in addition to that, let's just remind ourselves of the context of what the lies were that were then used to take us into Afghanistan, that were then used to take us into Iraq, which again had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. And you know, about 3,000 to 4,000 Americans, depending on how you want to call the injuries that were sustained in the aftermath with all of the debris and shit like that. You know, you could average a couple thousand Americans died in 9/11, right? Upwards of over 1 million people died in the subsequent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that were launched by the United States, that were launched by the international terrorist George W. Bush. So these are the types of consequences that come from our mishandling of a reaction to what 9/11 actually was. And so it's not just a question of what was Saudi Arabia's involvement in it. We also have to reflect on how we just invaded illegally 2 countries that essentially had nothing to do with 9/11, especially relative to Saudi Arabia's involvement in it. And then we spent 2 decades occupying and fighting a pointless war in these two countries, in Afghanistan and Iraq, where a bunch of military-industrial complex officials basically got extremely rich, and the criminals who started this war based on lies, George W. Bush, continue to roam free, continue to go out and give their opinions on foreign policy to this day, and without a little bit of shame. As we continue to see these documents unfolding, which we are going to continue to see them into the future, it'll be interesting to see how Joe Biden reacts to this, because again, this is one of our top current allies in the region, is Saudi Arabia, and he's wrapping up the war in Afghanistan in terms of our boots on the ground presence. We'll see how he wants to handle Iraq moving forward, but we're at the end of basically a string of 2 decades long completely failed wars that were launched based on lies in response to 9/11, and the actual government, the actual country that is arguably most responsible for 9/11 in the region, remains one of our top allies in Saudi Arabia. So Joe Biden has a lot of questions on the table that need to be answered, and I'm looking forward to the release of more of these documents, because it's going to get interesting and it's going to get spicy.